Hi, I'm Brooke.
And I'm Allison.
And we're back with KETV News at 7.
Earlier today, we were thinking about some ruining things in Nebraska.
In the 1930s, when the Dust Bowl came, it led to many causes, problems, and impacts. When people saw this huge black cloud, they didn't know what to expect. It looked like a tornado coming towards them. The winds were blowing hard along with all the dust. It would blow everywhere, including in food, water, or even the lungs of living things. People stayed inside homes or in cellars to stay protected from the storm. Schools were also used so children could stay out of these storms as well. These dust bowls led to many more causes, problems, and impacts to the Great Plains.
Besides these dust bowls, there were some major causes. One example is that there was very little rainfall, which caused the drought. With this drought, there was very dry soil, and when the winds picked up, the dust would blow everywhere. It was just like a huge black cloud. Also, some farmers were newer to the Great Plains and didn't know how to farm properly yet. If they would have known how to place seeds properly, the crops might have lived longer in the storm. Since they weren't planted correctly, this is what could have led to them being pulled up from the ground. If the farmers would have thought ahead, they could have also put their farm animals in a shelter where they would have been able to live. Not as much dust would get into the animals, and they could have lasted without going to waste. Since there were some major causes with the dust bowl, this led to many problems with it too.
Yeah, it's amazing what droughts can do. This dust bowl left many problems behind too. Many crops got ruined because of the dust filling them and winds blowing strong. The strong winds pulled them up out of the ground and blew them into many places. For example, they would get caught on fences or along houses. Also on farms, many animals would die. In this case, they were probably grazing and the farmers couldn't round them in. After a few years, many were found dead in fields with 2 inches of dirt covering them. Besides farm animals, many people were also dying, which meant being outside was a bad idea. Dust would get in their lungs and make them really ill. It was called dust pneumonia. If you were outside doing something, this is probably the #1 case of dust pneumonia. Another problem could be that farmers and people moved away. They moved away because drought, dust, diseases, or even death. California was the place to go. Farmers would look for more orchards and farmland. Lots of people also went to just get away from these dust storms. These problems were when the dust bowl happened. There were still impacts to come.
Sounds like the dust bowls were crazy. I bet our population went down then. After the dust bowl, there were still many impacts on the Great Plains. Finally, almost a decade later, it rained. This was like glory. Farmers and people could restart their normal life. Then they would get the right amount of rain for the crops. Most people would use this water for drinking. They would well it up from the ground. It was great to have water, not just dust. Also, new machines were made so that there would be less dust flying around. There was a special chemical that they would put down so the dust was more likely to stay on the ground. This helped the risk of getting another dust bowl in the Great Plains. Another impact on the farmers would be that all the crops the farmers planted were then ruined. During the dust bowl, the dust would get into the crops and the plants, and the strong winds would whisk them up. Now there were barely any crops left, and if there were, they were most likely ruined. Since the farmers lived off mostly what they got paid from the crops, they would maybe be in debt now. They had no crops to sell. Some of these impacts were useful in the end. Some of them were hard to get through.
I guess it just depends on which impact you're for. The dust bowl was a big surprise for many of the people living through this time. I bet both adults and children were confused on what was going on. It would have been sort of scary. One thing that we realized was that many farmers' lives were ruined. Their crops were destroyed along with their animals. This is all because of the dust and wind. Then about a decade later, it rained. It was a shock for everybody. Even though some of the people that once lived in the Great Plains had moved to California, the people who stayed were in complete shock. They had never thought it would have happened. So the dust bowl led to many more causes, problems, and impacts.
I bet that was great for everybody. Thanks for joining us. Be sure to come back and watch